Hello my dear friends, you're in the Military Summary channel. In this video we're going to discuss the most important events that took place during the previous 12 hours. We have lots of very interesting updates, so let's start. And first we're going to talk about the conflict on the Ukraine, and we see that the conflict on the Ukraine changes. It changes and we see that the conflict enters its final phase, the stage of exhaustion. During the previous night, both the Russians and the Ukrainians once again attacked each other using drones. The Minister of Defense of Ukraine stated that the Russians used 109 drones to attack the Ukraine. I would like to remind you that yesterday the Russians used 90 drones, and the day before yesterday the Russians used 99 drones, which means that since the beginning of Thursday of 18th of June of 2026, most likely the Russians have already concentrated and accumulated around 600 drones to carry out a massive attack, which most likely is going to start very soon. As of the previous 24 hours, the Russians were using different types of weapons. By the way, the Russians were using hypersonic missiles. The Russians attacked the city of Starokonstantinov. Most likely the Russians attacked the Starokonstantinov airfield. The Russians attacked the Zhytomyr airfield, which is also located in the western parts of Ukraine, and the Russians attacked something along the border. Most likely the Russians were attacking airfields and airfield infrastructure with the purpose not to allow the Ukrainians to use their aircrafts as air defense forces. Furthermore, during the previous 12 hours, the Russians attacked the Borispol logistic hub. So this territory was significantly damaged by Russians, and during the previous 24 hours, a lot of videos were published on this matter. So the Russians attacked and destroyed another logistic hub, which most likely the Ukrainians were using to store parts for drones. Furthermore, the Russians, the third day in a row, continue attacks on the southwestern parts of the Odessa region. And according to information we have, the Russians destroyed the oil base on the territory of the settlement of Artsiz. And this video was published by different sources, and here we can see first seconds after Russians attacked this oil base. And as you can see, as a result of this attack, the oil base was destroyed. I would like to remind you that during the previous 2 days, the Russians were attacking gas stations and fuel trucks along M15 road. Just yesterday, we discussed the Russian attack on a gas station in the area of the settlement of Sarate. A fuel truck, as you can see, was destroyed. And 2 days ago, we received a report that the Russians destroyed a fuel truck in the area of the settlement of Manashi. And this video was published by locals, so we discussed this video many times. So as you can see, the Russians continue attacking. Russia continue destroying the logistics and energy infrastructure through the most southwestern parts of the Odessa region. And due to these videos, we can say that most likely the Russians have already cut the southwestern parts of the Odessa region from the mainland. Now we are moving to the most important and the most interesting situation that have taken since the 20th of June of 2026. We are going to talk about the city of Zaporizhzhia. This morning, pro-Ukrainian and pro-Russian sources published a lot of videos and a lot of articles about the situation in this area. And here we can see how the Russians attacked the city of Zaporizhzhia with bombs. So from this perspective, we can say that there is nothing special, nothing interesting with this attack. The Russians have attacked the city of Zaporizhzhia with bombs since the beginning of the special military operation thousands of times. But this attack differs from the previous attacks because the Russians, for the first time since the beginning of the special military operation, attacked bridges along the river of Dnipro. And most likely the Russians will continue. And as for this attack, we can see the Russian attempt, the Russian probably first attempt to attack the bridges along the river of Dnipro with the purpose to destroy them and to cut the eastern parts of Ukraine from the western parts of Ukraine. So we have explosions. The Russians, as a result of this first attack, obviously missed. And later, pro-Ukrainian sources published several pictures where we can see craters in the area of these bridges. So this is the first crater, and this is, for example, two more craters along the Vantovy bridge and the Preobrazhensky bridge. All these explosions took place here, which means that most likely the Russians were trying to destroy this infrastructure or to damage this infrastructure significantly, with the purpose not to allow the Ukrainians to use these bridges for logistic purposes. When talking about the city of Zaporizhzhia, there are just 3 bridges in this area. These 2 bridges were just damaged by Russians, or the Russians attempted to damage them, and we have a bridge in the northern parts of the settlement of Zaporizhzhia, and this bridge is a part of the Dnipro hydroelectrical station. And this bridge was also damaged, or the Russians made an attempt to damage the bridge, but the Russians also missed. They managed to deal damage to infrastructure around. So, which means that most likely the Russians will continue this practice, and the Russians will try during the next 2 or 3 months to destroy the Zaporizhzhia bridges completely, and which will most likely lead to complete collapse of the entire Zaporizhzhia direction, because a very big part of Ukraine's logistics goes through exactly the city and use these bridges, and if they are destroyed, the Ukrainians most likely would not be able to replace these logistics with other bridges or other places and sites, which means, and probably another important thing, that if Russians destroy the Zaporizhzhia bridges, then most likely they will move further in the direction of the city of Dnipro, and they would try to do the same thing there as well. Another picture was published from the city of Zaporizhzhia. Here we have the moment when the Russians were attacking the Zaporizhzhia bridges between the 20th and the 21st of June of 2026. As of now, pro-Ukrainian sources are trying to keep this information in secret, trying not to publish lots of updates on this matter, but one thing is clear, that the Russians have begun this process. The destruction of the bridges of Zaporizhzhia right now, it seems it's just a matter of time, but not the matter of whether the Russians are able to do this or are going to do this or not. Another important area is the settlement of Shakhtarskaya. The Russians during the previous 24 hours also attacked this small village. This village is located right exactly in the area of evacuation. I would like to remind you that several days ago the Ukrainian authorities announced the evacuation from these territories. Now the Ukrainians are trying to expand the evacuation zone, and most likely the Russians were attacking temporary deployment points of the armed forces of Ukraine through this settlement. Now let's move further. Let's move to the central part of Ukraine. The sources also reported about explosions and strikes through the city of Zaporizhzhia. The Russians were using missiles to attack the city of Poltava, and we have lots of videos, about the consequences of attacks. As you can see, several parking sites were destroyed, several buildings, constructions were reduced to ruins as a result of attacks. We have videos with black smokes over some enterprises and so on, which means that most likely the Russians were attacking the city of Poltava and its facilities and railways facilities first of all, while the Ukrainians were trying to redeploy additional forces in the direction of the line of combat contact and in the direction of the city of Kharkiv. The city of Kharkiv and the Kharkiv direction. During the previous night, lots of interesting updates were received from this area. I would like to remind you that just yesterday we discussed the video from the most northwestern parts of the city of Kharkiv, and we discussed this video where we can see that the Russians, as a result of aviation strike, a Russian Su-34 destroyed this drone storage facility and components for their production on the outskirts of Kharkiv. We discussed this video yesterday. Another logistic hub was completely destroyed, and today we received the report that another logistic hub was destroyed, but this time to the west of the city of Kharkiv along MO3 road, and this is another logistic hub, another unit of the Nova Poshta, of the post office of Ukraine. So here we have lots of videos on this matter. Here we have a vehicle that was moving through this territory. The Russians, according to information we have, attacked this territory with drones, and probably they will attack this territory once again with Iskander missile. As a result of attack, this logistic hub was also significantly damaged, but most likely wasn't destroyed, but probably the Russians will repeat this strike in coming hours. And another important thing is that the Russians, as you can see, once again continue attacking and destroying facilities just along 100 kilometers line in depth of the line of combat contact, and the Russians most likely will continue this process. Once again, in summarizing everything, the Russians destroyed fuel infrastructure objects, the Russians attacked for the first time bridges, the Russians destroyed several logistic hubs, and the Russians attacked strategic airfields of the armored force Ukraine that could be used for aircrafts, that could be used for the air defense purposes. Now let's discuss the situation with the Ukrainian massive attack. During the previous nights, the Ukrainians continue attacking Crimea. And as for the previous 24 hours, lots of explosions were recorded through the city of Kerch from the one and from the other side of the Taman Bay and the Kerch Strait. The Ukrainians attacked this territory using hundreds of drones. Lots of videos were published during the previous nights. Explosions. Most likely the Ukrainians managed to hit objects of energy infrastructure, and the Ukrainians managed to destroy several fuel tanks. The situation with fuel in the area of Kerch is very difficult. Today we have lots of very interesting reports published by the local authorities. For example, local authorities reported that fuel sales to individuals and legal entities have been suspended at gas stations in Crimea, according to Aksionov. Fuel will only be sold to government agencies that ensure the functioning and security of this territory. So from now on, civilians and the legal entities are not able to purchase fuel on the territory of Crimea. Another important map was published by different sources where we can see at least 4 fire anomalies through this area, and the most important fire anomaly was recorded along this territory. So there is a port of Kavkaz, so this one, and the most important thing that this is not just the port, this is the port which the Russians use to transfer trucks, fuels, many other different things using ships. So they have ships in this area that can be loaded with vehicles, and then these ships, let's say from one side of this area, moves in the direction of Crimea. The Russians start using this situation when they start suffering huge problems with the logistics and with fuel. Another important thing, if we increase the number of updates since the beginning of May, you would see a very interesting video that was published by different sources. This one, and here we can see, and we have already discussed this situation several weeks ago. This video was published on the 2nd of June of 2026, and here we can see dozens of fuel trucks that were waiting for their turn to cross this territory. And according to information we have, during the previous nights and this morning, the Ukrainians attacked the concentration of these fuel trucks, and we have this fire anomaly. So the situation is very difficult, and we see that the fuel crisis on the territory of Crimea enters its final phase. But from the other side, the Russians continue improving their bridges and their infrastructure through the northern parts of Crimea. We start receiving additional satellite pictures with additional bridges that the Russians created. The Russians created additional bridges in the north of the settlement of Armyansk, and the Russians created additional bridges in this area of the settlement of Genichesk. As for the northern Crimean road, we see that the Russians partially stabilized the situation, and they continue this process. As for the territory in the area of the city of Kerch, we see that the situation continue deteriorating, and most likely the situation with fuel crisis, the Russians will not be able to stabilize during the summer of 2026. Now let's move further and let's discuss the situation on the ground. During the previous 12 hours, lots of important updates were received through the northern directions. The Russians improved their position significantly in the Sumy direction, and these are the changes on the ground between the dates. So this is the end of the 19th of June of 2026, and this is the beginning of the 21st of June of 2026. The Russians improved their position significantly between the settlements of Hotin, Pisarevka, Volzhansk, Lubyanskaya, Kainitsa, Novaya Sich, and Krapivshina. These are the changes. The Russians improved their position significantly, and it seems that the Russians are about to break through Ukraine's defense, and the Russians are about to establish complete control over every single village we just listed. And if it happens, this is going to be not just another list of villages came under Russian control. This is going to be something like a breakthrough, because from these positions and from this foothold, the Russians will be able to continue developing their offensive operation further in the direction of the city of Sumy. And from this configuration, now it's obviously that the Russians are tasked to take the city of Sumy under complete control during the military campaign of 2026. Currently, the distance to the city of Sumy is already less than 15 kilometers, which is already nothing. Furthermore, the Russians continue their offensive operation through the Kharkiv directions. We have additional changes in the area of the settlement of Kazachia Lopань, small changes, but they were recorded, and the Russians intensify their attacks on positions of the armored forces of Ukraine in the area of the settlement of Zolochiv with aviation. The Ukrainians use these villages as temporary deployment points for FPV drone operators with the purpose to attack Russian troops that are trying to advance along the settlement of Kazachia Lopань. As for the Bilyi Kolodyaz direction, as you can see, during the previous 12 hours, we have additional changes. So this is the situation by the end of the 18th of June, this is the end of the 19th of June, and this is the beginning of the 21st of June of 2026. The Russians began their broad frontline attack in the direction of the settlement of Bilyi Kolodyaz. The Russians attack in the direction of the settlement from many directions using hundreds of troops and vehicles. The Russians, most likely with this pace of offensive operation, would be able to get the settlement of Bilyi Kolodyaz from every single direction within the next months, and the battle for this settlement will begin. And if Ukrainians lose control over the settlement of Bilyi Kolodyaz, the front line would be breached, and the Ukrainians would be forced to fall back further in the southern direction, and control over the settlement of Bilyi Kolodyaz would allow the Russians to maintain the line along this red line between the river of Oskol and the most northeastern parts of Kharkiv region, and the Ukrainians would be forced to retreat even further in the southwestern direction, almost to the settlement of Pechenegi and Chuguyev, and the Ukrainians would try to establish the front line along the river of Seversky Donets, and we will return back to the situation of 2022, just before the beginning of the Kharkiv counter-offensive operation that was carried out by the Ukrainians. As of the 21st of June of 2026, now we start receiving updates that the Russians are launching more and more drones in the direction of Ukraine, which means that during the day between the 21st and 22nd of June of 2026, we'll see a massive attack from the Russian side. The Russians most likely would continue attacking and destroying gas stations, objects of energy infrastructure, and different terminals through the entire territory of Ukraine with the purpose to destroy the entire logistics of Ukraine. And that's it for the short video. The military summary channel remains to condemn any violence in the world. Thank you for your watching, subscribe to my channel, put your likes, join my Patreon, and have a good day. Bye bye.